Under the ink-black sky above Manhattan, Cassandra Westwood stood at the edge of the Empire State Building's observation deck, her fingers wrapped tightly around the cold iron railing. Far below her, the city pulsed with light, cars flickering, like fireflies in veins of asphalt, buildings glowing like distant stars. It was beautiful in the way only something utterly indifferent could be. The December wind sliced through her coat, stinging her cheeks and tugging at her hair. It smelled like snow and steel and something else, like dreams unfinished, forgotten. She breathed it in and let it settle inside her. This place had once meant hope. When she was a girl, she'd looked out over the skyline and imagined the life that had been promised to her. A wedding, a marriage, a future carved in marble by her family's will. It had all been laid out neatly, like one of her mother's formal table settings. No space for questions, only ceremony. But tonight, she wasn't looking ahead. She was looking back, and what she saw behind her burned colder than the air that bit at her skin. Years of quiet obedience, of love given like alms and never returned, of betrayal wrapped in silk and disguised as tradition. In her last life, because that was how she thought of it now, Cassandra had loved Gabriel Delancey, with the kind of devotion only children are foolish enough to believe will last. Their families had decided their fate before either could form memories. The Westwoods and the Delanceys, two dynasties tethered by legacy, money, and a marriage contract signed in ink but enforced with blood. Cassandra had accepted the arrangement willingly. She had adored Gabriel, his charm, his name, his smile that could cut a room in half. He had been her first kiss, her first heartbreak, her only mistake. She remembered the moment she died as clearly as she remembered her first waltz. It had been quiet, sterile, a hospital room lit by fluorescent ghosts. Her body, once vibrant and defiant, had been reduced to pale skin and protruding bones, veins like blue rivers beneath paper-thin skin. She had waited for Gabriel until her last breath. She had believed he would come, that he'd sit by her bedside and hold her hand, that even in death she wouldn't be alone. But he never came, and when her lungs gave up, her heart had already broken. The final betrayal, she discovered later, far too late, was that Gabriel had married Isabel Ward, her childhood rival, the day of Cassandra's funeral. The same day. He hadn't even waited to mourn her. She had died with hope in her chest, and she had awoken with rage in her blood. Because somehow, she didn't know how, and at first she thought she had gone mad. She was back. Back in her body, back in time, back before the wedding, before the lies, before the grave. She had been given a second chance, a second life. But this time she would not waste it loving a man who had danced on her grave. This time, she would choose herself. The wind rose again, carrying with it the scent of frost and something final. She released the railing and stepped back, her fingers aching with cold. Below her, the city breathed, indifferent, eternal. Cassandra Westwood turned from the skyline and made her way back toward the elevator, each step a goodbye to the girl who had once believed in fairy tales. The woman taking her place didn't believe in fairy tales anymore. She believed in choices, and she was ready to make hers. The morning air in Upper Manhattan was brittle, sharp with the promise of winter, and the frost on the wrought iron gates of the Delancey estate shimmered like crushed glass. Cassandra stepped out of the waiting town car and stood for a moment, staring up at the house she had once believed would become her home. It looked different now, not smaller. No, the Delancey estate never shrank, but something inside her had changed so completely that the grand architecture no longer impressed. It loomed instead, a monument to everything she had once surrendered. Her voice, her future, her worth. She walked forward with purpose. The butler, James, if memory served, opened the front door before she had a chance to knock. He blinked at her, startled, then stepped aside. "Miss Westwood," he said, his voice cautious. "You weren't expected this early." "I won't be long," she replied. Her heels struck the marble floor with a crisp, deliberate rhythm as she crossed the grand foyer. No one stopped her. No one dared. She followed the scent of coffee and firewood into the drawing room, where the man who had once treated her like a granddaughter sat by the hearth, newspaper in hand. Richard Delancey looked up, surprise registering in the deep lines of his face. His silver hair caught the firelight like threads of steel. "Cassandra," he said, setting the paper down slowly. "You're up early." "I'm not here for pleasantries," she said. "I've come to end the engagement." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Richard arched one brow, a move she remembered from childhood, equal parts challenge and curiosity. "What engagement?" "My engagement to Gabriel," she said. "I won't marry him." A long silence followed. The only sound was the quiet pop of wood in the fireplace. At last, Richard leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Your grandfather and I made that arrangement years ago, for the good of both families. Surely you understand." "I understand perfectly," she interrupted, her tone razor-sharp. "But the contract doesn't say I must marry Gabriel, only that I marry a Delancey." The words struck like flint against stone. Richard sat back, his brows knitting. "And who, then, do you intend to marry?" Cassandra turned toward the tall, shadowed figure near the window. Lucas Delancey, the youngest son, the recluse, the one they all ignored. He stood half in shadow, hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, his dark eyes unreadable. Where Gabriel had always filled a room with noise and charm, Lucas absorbed it, made it still. "I'll marry Lucas," she said. She felt rather than heard the stillness that followed. Lucas didn't speak. Not yet. Richard's cup clinked softly against its saucer as he set it down. "You're serious?" "Yes. Cassandra, this isn't a theater. You and Gabriel were a mistake," she said. "I don't want a wedding built on legacy and convenience. I want a life built on something real." Richard turned to Lucas. "Well?" he asked, his tone heavy with challenge. "What do you say?" The room felt suspended. Cassandra held her breath. She hadn't told Lucas anything in advance, hadn't begged, planned, or plotted. All she remembered from her past life was that he had been kind. Kind and gone. After Richard's death, Lucas had disappeared from the public eye, vanished across oceans never to return. She remembered thinking of him as safe, untouched. Lucas stepped forward, his face calm. "If she's made up her mind," he said, "I won't oppose it." It was not passion, it was not poetry, but it was choice, and for Cassandra that was enough. Richard leaned back in his chair, stunned into silence. The fire crackled, as if filling the space left by disbelief. Outside, snow began to fall, quiet as ash. And just like that, the axis of their world shifted. Lucas Delancey had never liked mornings. He'd always found the early hours too loud, too bright, too full of the kind of forced energy people use to disguise anxiety. Even as a child, he preferred dusk, when the world softened at the edges, when silence could exist without being questioned. And yet, on this particular morning, as he stood in the drawing room of the Delancey estate, his quiet was interrupted by a storm wearing heels. Cassandra Westwood. She'd arrived unannounced, uninvited. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, but it had the weight of a verdict. When she said she would marry him instead of Gabriel, Lucas hadn't flinched. He didn't ask why. He didn't challenge the absurdity of the declaration. He had simply looked at her and said, "If she's made up her mind, I won't oppose it." That was all. No dramatics. No second glances. Now, as the morning light spilled through tall windows and Richard Delancey retreated into stunned silence, Lucas studied the woman who had just redrawn the future. She hadn't looked at him after making the announcement. She hadn't asked for his help or his agreement. That alone told him everything he needed to know. She didn't need saving. She needed someone who wouldn't stand in her way. Later, after the room emptied and the whispers began their slow crawl, through the halls, Lucas found Cassandra alone in the east corridor, her hand resting lightly on the banister. She didn't turn when he approached. "I hope you know what you're doing," he said, voice low. "I don't," she replied, "but I know what I won't do again." Lucas leaned beside her, arms folded. You're not asking me for anything. No. No promises, no pretenses. She turned her head just slightly, enough to meet his gaze. Would you prefer lies? He almost smiled. No, I've had my fill of those. A long silence followed, but with Lucas, silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was a kind of language, one she too had learned to speak. Finally, she asked, "Why didn't you say no?" Lucas considered that for a moment. "Because I've seen how this family works," he said. "And for once, someone dared to break the rules. I respect that." She nodded once, slowly. Then she walked away, not with hesitation, but with purpose. Lucas watched her go, sensing something in her gait that mirrored his own, the calm after surviving a storm no one else had seen. He didn't know what would come of their arrangement, didn't pretend it was love, but he knew this. Cassandra Westwood was no longer someone to pity. She was someone to stand beside. And that, he thought, was worth showing up for. Gabriel Delancey returned 2 days later. The family estate was quieter than usual, as if holding its breath. The staff moved in half steps, whispering in corners, unsure which version of the Delanceys they would be serving now. He arrived without warning, bronze-skinned from some private resort in the Maldives, sunglasses still tucked into his collar, like arrogance wrapped in linen. The suitcase in his hand was expensive and irrelevant. The fire in his eyes was not. He stormed into the parlor where Richard sat updating the family calendar, his voice sharp as he barked, "What the hell is going on?" Richard didn't look up. "You're off the registry." Gabriel blinked. "Excuse me?" "I've removed your name," Richard said. "Cassandra will be marrying Lucas." Silence fell like broken glass. Gabriel's mouth twisted, first in disbelief, then fury. "You're joking." "I'm not. She can't just replace E." "She didn't," Richard said. "You did that yourself." Gabriel turned sharply. Cassandra had entered the room quietly, but her presence was unmistakable. She stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, posture relaxed. Too relaxed. "This is some kind of stunt, isn't it?" Gabriel snapped, "To make me jealous?" "No," she replied evenly. "Jealousy implies I care." His voice rose. "You're throwing away our future." "I'm throwing away a lie." He laughed bitterly. "Fine, marry the monk. Just don't come crawling back when he bores you to death." She didn't flinch, didn't speak, didn't move. When he stormed out, the echo of his departure lingered like smoke. Richard set down his pen, finally meeting her eyes. "You have the contract. Set the date." Cassandra nodded. 2 weeks. I want it done before Christmas." He studied her carefully, as if seeing her for the first time. "You've changed," he murmured. "No," she said. "I've remembered who I was before you all told me who to be." Later that evening, the news broke in private circles like a scandal born from silk. The Westwood Delancey engagement was off. But not only off, transferred. Gabriel's younger uncle, the family recluse, had stepped into the role. Whispers fluttered like moths around a flame. Some called it madness, others called it war. Cassandra called it freedom. And for the first time in her life, she didn't care what anyone else called it at all. By morning, the news had spread like perfume through the corridors of Manhattan's elite. Sweet, intoxicating, and impossible to ignore. Cassandra Westwood breaks off engagement with Gabriel Delancey and announces marriage to his uncle, the reclusive Lucas Delancey. The headlines were printed in gold foil for the weekend society papers, as if scandal could somehow be made elegant. Photos of Cassandra stepping out of the Delancey estate, her face unreadable, were plastered across social columns. There were no photos of Lucas, just a vague description. The silent brother, the forgotten son. In private lounges and marble foyers, champagne was poured, and gossip flowed. "Surely it's a ploy," someone said at the Argonne Club. "She's punishing Gabriel." "She's trading down," said another. "No title, no business stake, no flair." But beneath the cynicism was something else. Fascination. Because no one had ever said no to the Delancey heir. No woman had ever walked away from the golden boy, not in public. Not on her own terms, and certainly not for Lucas. At the Westwood home, Cassandra's parents were livid. "You've embarrassed us," her mother snapped, pacing before the fireplace. "You've undone years of planning. You were raised for this." "I was raised to be quiet," Cassandra replied calmly. "And I'm not quiet anymore." Her father sighed, defeated. "You'll regret this, Cassandra. That family does not forgive easily." She looked at him, eyes cool. "I don't need their forgiveness." At the same time, across the city, Isabel Ward sat beside Gabriel in his penthouse, scrolling through social media with gleaming eyes. "She's trending," Isabel muttered, her tone half amused, half venomous. "Westwood defies Delancey's. Bold little martyr." Gabriel stood at the window, jaw tight. "She humiliated me." "She liberated herself," Isabel corrected, but her smile didn't reach her eyes, which frankly is worse. Gabriel didn't respond. He was staring down at the city as if it had betrayed him too. Cassandra had been his guarantee, of power, of legacy, of admiration. He hadn't loved her, not really, but he had loved being loved by her, and now she'd taken that from him. "I want it undone," he said at last. Isabel raised an eyebrow. "You can't force someone to marry you." "I can make her regret it." She tilted her head. "Careful, darling. You sound like the villain." He turned then, smiling without warmth. "That depends who's telling the story." Back at the estate, Cassandra sat in the library with Lucas. "We should prepare for backlash," she said, voice measured. Lucas only sipped his coffee. "Let them talk." She looked at him. "Aren't you worried?" He met her gaze. "You didn't choose me to make a statement, and I didn't agree to this for appearances." "No," she said, "we did it for ourselves." And in a world built on masks, that truth was more dangerous than any lie. The Delancey estate had never been louder than when it was quiet. It was the kind of silence that followed breaking glass, the hush that lingered just long enough for tension to grow teeth. Cassandra felt it in every step of the marble hallway as she approached the drawing room. The sideways glances from the staff, the overly polished banisters, the sudden absence of Gabriel's name on the household calendar. She had expected quiet. She had not expected Isabel Ward. The moment Cassandra entered the room, she saw her. Isabel was sitting in the center of the Delancey parlor like a queen on a throne she hadn't been invited to occupy. She wore red, too red for mourning, too bold for decorum, too deliberate not to be war paint. Her legs were crossed with calculated elegance, her manicured fingers curled around a porcelain teacup she had no right to touch. "Ah," Isabel said, smiling with saccharine sweetness. "The bride-to-be." Cassandra didn't stop walking. She crossed to the fireplace and took her place by the hearth, ignoring the faint scent of Isabel's perfume, something sharp and expensive and desperate. "You're trespassing," Cassandra said without looking at her. "The estate no longer belongs to you or your companion." Isabel set her teacup down with a soft clink. "Oh, darling, you don't own this place either. You're just the newest accessory." Cassandra met her gaze then, cool, unbothered. "And yet here you are, dressed like a red flag." Isabel's smile tightened. "Gabriel and I came to speak with Richard. We thought he should hear our side of things." "Of course," Cassandra said. "Every villain needs a monologue." Isabel stood, her heels sharp against the floor, and closed the distance between them. For a moment, the air between them was tight, humming with something invisible. "You think this ends with a wedding and applause?" Isabel whispered. "You think marrying Lucas makes you strong?" Cassandra tilted her head. "No, it makes me free." Footsteps echoed down the hall. Richard Delancey entered, expression already sour. The moment he saw Isabel, his face darkened. "You," he snapped. "Out!" "Richard, you were warned. Neither you nor Gabriel is welcome here anymore." Isabel turned to Cassandra, her mask cracking. "You did this." "No," Cassandra said, "you did. I just stopped pretending not to see it." Richard gestured to the butler. "Show her out." As Isabel was escorted away, the hallway fell back into silence. Lucas stepped into the doorway just as the tension began to fade. "Was that necessary?" he asked quietly. Cassandra didn't answer right away. She looked at the fire, then said, "She came dressed for a fight. I just didn't let her win one." The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Cassandra was sipping tea by the window, grading papers in the dormitory's cramped faculty lounge, when the subject line cut through her like ice. "Urgent. Plagiarism allegation. Please report to principal's office." She stared at the words, unblinking. For a moment, her breath stilled in her chest. Then methodically, she gathered her things and walked down the corridor with the calm of someone who had learned how not to panic in public. The principal's office was too quiet when she entered. Mr. Alston, a kindly man she had worked with, for years sat behind his desk with his hands folded, not in welcome but in bracing. "I don't want to believe it," he began, his voice low. "But the evidence is difficult to ignore." "What evidence?" Cassandra asked, her voice steady. He hesitated. "A former teacher, Isabel Ward, submitted early drafts of an identical article weeks before yours was turned in. Same title, same thesis, same examples. The education board was notified." Cassandra blinked. "Are you suggesting I stole it from her?" "I'm saying that from the outside," he said carefully. "It appears she wrote it first." "She didn't," Cassandra replied coldly. "I wrote every word. I worked on it for a month. She provided time-stamped files." And he paused, wincing. "They were found on your old laptop, left in the apartment you shared with Gabriel." The room blurred for a second. Cassandra felt the burn of betrayal before the realization fully formed. Isabel had stolen her work, not just taken it, but used it against her. In a system where reputation was everything, Isabel had painted her as a fraud, and it was working. "I have to ask you to take a leave of absence," Alston said, "until the review is complete." Cassandra rose, slow and silent. Understood. She left without protest, without rage. But inside, something twisted sharply like a knife pulled through cloth. In the hallway, Isabel stood near the water fountain, pretending not to wait. "You did this," Cassandra said quietly. Isabel turned, all innocence and malice. "You really shouldn't leave your drafts in someone else's apartment. So careless. You stole from me. And you stole Gabriel," she replied with a smirk. "Balance." Cassandra walked away before her fury could spill. She didn't scream, she didn't fight. She let the system hang her. But as she stepped out into the winter air, cheeks burning, heart raw, Cassandra whispered to herself, "You can take my title, but not my name." And that, she knew, would be her weapon. The invitation was not hers. In fact, there was no invitation at all. But Cassandra went anyway. She wore black, simple, elegant, and uninvited. The kind of black that spoke more than red ever could. The restaurant was a glossy affair in Soho, dimly lit with chandeliers shaped like icicles and waiters who moved like whispers. At the back, in the private dining room, Gabriel and Isabel held court. It wasn't a formal celebration, but the air reeked of victory. Isabel laughed too loudly. Gabriel had his arm slung around the back of her chair, a half-drunk bottle of wine beside him. Around them, former colleagues, old friends, and a few new loyalists toasted Isabel's upcoming appointment and resilience in the face of envy. Cassandra stepped inside without hesitation. The room fell into a stunned hush. She didn't speak, didn't offer greetings. She walked straight to the head of the table where a crystal glass of red wine sat untouched in front of Isabel. Gabriel stood, incredulous. "What are you doing here?" Cassandra didn't answer. She picked up the wine glass and poured it, slowly, deliberately, over Isabel's carefully styled hair. Gasps erupted like fireworks. Wine trickled down the collar of Isabel's designer blouse, staining silk and skin. Her eyes widened in shock before narrowing in fury. "You insane bitch!" Gabriel lunged forward, grabbing Cassandra's wrist. "What the hell is wrong with you? She's a single mother. Do you know how hard she's worked?" Cassandra turned. To him, voice like velvet over a blade. "You knew. What? You helped her forge the documents. You let her destroy my career. He didn't answer. So she slapped him. The crack echoed in the silence. I wouldn't marry you in 1,000 lifetimes, she said, and you should pray our names are never spoken in the same sentence again. She turned without waiting for a reply. Behind her, Isabel fumed, dripping red like a fallen queen. Gabriel stood stunned, his pride bleeding faster than his cheek. Cassandra walked out into the street alone. It was cold. It was dark. But for the first time in months, she felt warm. Not with revenge, but with clarity. They had thought she would disappear, quietly, fade out, shrink. But silence was never surrender. And tonight she had reminded them exactly who she was. The employee dormitory was not meant for women like Cassandra Westwood. Its narrow halls smelled faintly of instant coffee and old radiator heat. The walls were beige and uninspired, and the mattress in her assigned room sagged in the middle like a shrug. A single window overlooked the side of another building. No skyline, no view, just bricks. But it was quiet. And after everything, quiet was enough. She carried her boxes up alone. Books, a few clothes, a framed photograph she hadn't looked at in months. The woman in the picture no longer resembled her. The old Cassandra had stood perfectly posed beside Gabriel, her smile measured, her eyes dulled by expectation. She left the frame face down in the drawer. The first night, she didn't cry. She thought she might. But no tears came. Only stillness. The next morning she woke to whispers. They followed her down the corridors through the staff lounge into the classroom where she no longer belonged. Whispers about the wine, the slap, the scandal, about Isabel and Gabriel, and how Cassandra had gone too far. She didn't answer them. She didn't need to. Let them gossip. Let them wonder. Let them remember that she had chosen to stand alone. No ring, no title, no job. And she was still standing. At lunch, Naomi, a fellow teacher and one of the few who hadn't turned her back, slid into the seat across from her in the cafeteria. You okay? Naomi asked gently. I'm breathing, Cassandra replied. That counts. They sat in silence for a while. The buzz of fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Finally, Naomi leaned in. You know, you could write something. Cassandra looked up. What? I've seen the way you observe people, the way you listen. You could tell your story or something else. Channel it. Cassandra almost laughed. Writing, after being accused of plagiarism? But later that night, when the dormitory was silent and her tea had gone cold, she opened her laptop. The screen blinked back at her, empty, waiting. And for the first time in weeks, her fingers moved without trembling. She didn't write about Gabriel or Isabel. She wrote about choices, about losing everything and finding something purer in the loss. She wrote not to prove anything, but to remember herself. The words came slowly at first, then all at once, and when she finally stopped hours later, she read the title at the top of the document, The Quiet Power of Choosing Yourself. A faint smile touched her lips. She wasn't a teacher anymore, but maybe, just maybe she had found her voice again. The boutique was quiet, tucked into a narrow corner of Tribeca, nestled between a French bakery and a gallery that never seemed to open. Cassandra hadn't planned to stop. She had been walking without destination, thinking without direction, when the pale linen in the display window caught her eye. She stepped inside. The smell of cotton and cedar greeted her like an old book. The store was small, curated, rows of bolts arranged by color, texture, and whisper. There was something calming about it, something honest. Fabric never lied. It was either strong or it frayed, either smooth or coarse. What you saw was what you got. She ran her fingers across a soft navy linen. Lucas only ever wore white. She considered for a moment what he might look like in this color. Still calm, still quiet, but warmer, more human. She smiled to herself, imagining the way it would fall on his shoulders, how it might wrinkle where he leaned. Interesting choice, a voice said behind her, too familiar to be mistaken. Cassandra turned slowly. Isabel stood a few feet away, wrapped in a red trench coat that clung too tightly to her frame. Gabriel loomed behind her, paler than she remembered, his tan faded, his eyes tired. Still shopping like a charity wife? Isabel's voice was smooth, but the bitterness beneath it crackled like static. I suppose you have to dress him yourself. Lucas never did know how to be presentable. Cassandra said nothing at first. She studied them both. Isabel, polished, but brittle, and Gabriel, shrinking beneath the weight of his own arrogance. Once their presence would have broken her. Now it merely bored her. You can have it, she said, nodding to the bolt Isabel had touched. It's a better fit, for someone who enjoys leftovers. The words hit harder than volume ever could. Isabel's smile faltered. Gabriel flinched, but Cassandra had already turned. She walked past them, her spine straight, her breath steady. The door chimed softly behind her. Outside, the city buzzed as it always did, but the noise no longer touched her. She wasn't angry. She wasn't wounded. She was free. That night, over a quiet dinner at home, Lucas noticed her smile. "Good day?" he asked. Cassandra sipped her wine. Strangely, yes. He didn't press further. He never did. Instead, he reached for her hand beneath the table. Just a light touch, no questions. And in that gesture, Cassandra felt something deeper than victory. She felt peace. The restaurant in Soho was cozy, lined with old brick and mismatched lighting, the kind of place where you could hear jazz playing softly even over clinking glasses. Naomi had insisted on taking Cassandra out, an American-style bachelorette party, she'd said, half teasing, half tender. You're still getting married, remember? It was warm inside. Gentle laughter rose from nearby tables. For tea. The first time in weeks, Cassandra let herself lean back, sip wine, and smile like the world hadn't tried to crush her. Halfway through dinner, she excused herself. The restroom was at the end of a narrow hallway, just past a door slightly ajar. She didn't mean to stop, but she heard his voice, low, careless, familiar. Gabriel. Cassandra froze. The private room next to the restrooms had thin walls and thinner doors. Inside, Gabriel was speaking to a group of acquaintances. His voice, once her comfort, now grated, like glass underfoot. If it weren't for Isabel, he was saying, I would have never agreed to marry Cassandra. Just looking at her made me sick. There was laughter, muffled but cruel. Marrying her was a way to shut my grandfather up, he added, and to keep Isabel around. Westwood girls are trained to be silent, and I needed silence. Cassandra didn't breathe. She wasn't sure what stunned her more, the words or the fact that they didn't break her. A year ago, she would have shattered. Now she only listened. A pause. Then another voice, Isabel's. She thought you were in love with her. Can you believe it? More laughter. Cassandra stepped back from the door. Her pulse was steady, her vision clear. The betrayal had already happened. The heartbreak was history, and tonight it sounded pathetic. She returned to her table, slipping into her seat as Naomi chatted about wedding flowers. She smiled, ate, laughed even, as if nothing had happened, because nothing had, not really. Gabriel's words weren't revelations, they were remnants. And she was done letting remnants write her future. That night, Cassandra sat by her bedroom window, staring out at the glowing skyline. Somewhere in that vast city, Gabriel still believed he had power over her, still believed he mattered. But here, in this quiet corner of her life, surrounded by warmth and honesty, she understood the truth. Some voices didn't need to be silenced, they just needed to be outgrown. The Pierre Hotel stood like a quiet monument above Fifth Avenue, elegant, timeless, and discreet. It wasn't the kind of place that screamed luxury. It whispered it. Guests arrived expecting spectacle. After all, Cassandra Westwood had once been promised to Gabriel Delancey. Their wedding had been the talk of the season, a union of two dynasties, fated since childhood. Now she was marrying his uncle, the man no one remembered until he stopped disappearing. Curiosity buzzed louder than the string quartet, But when the guests entered the ballroom, it wasn't grandeur that greeted them. It was stillness. Lucas stood at the front of the room in a navy suit, tailored with the kind of precision that didn't demand attention. It simply fit. He didn't fidget. He didn't smile for effect. He waited, calm, present. And then Cassandra appeared. No lace, no veil, no sparkle. She wore a minimalist silk gown that moved like quiet wind, her hair pulled back, her eyes clear. There was no spectacle, no orchestra, no dramatic gasp, only stillness, only truth. As she walked down the aisle, she met no one's gaze but his. Lucas watched her not as a man dazzled by beauty, but as someone who saw her, not the heiress, not the scandal. Just her. They exchanged vows in low voices without trembling. No one cried, no one cheered, and yet something shifted in that room. Something ancient, something delicate, like a breath finally released after years of holding it in. At the reception, Cassandra did not throw a bouquet. She stood beside Lucas with a quiet glass of champagne, speaking softly to the few guests who mattered. Naomi, the principal who'd once doubted her but now offered a genuine smile, and a few of Lucas's quiet friends from abroad. Halfway through the evening, the doors opened. Gabriel, he entered, with the arrogance of a man who still believed the world owed him attention. Isabel clung to his arm, her dress too tight, her expression too loud. The music faltered. Conversations paused. Gabriel's eyes found Cassandra, and something in him shattered. "This was supposed to be my wedding," he said aloud. Not to her, but to the room. Richard Delancey, standing nearby, didn't flinch. "You made your choice. This is what walking away looks like." Gabriel turned to Cassandra. "You manipulated them." Lucas stepped forward. "Say what you need to. Say, then leave." Gabriel looked between them, his former fiancé and the man he'd dismissed for years. "You think this will last?" he sneered. "You think this is love?" Cassandra's answer was simple. It already is. Gabriel said nothing more. He left. This time no one followed, and as Cassandra turned back to Lucas, hand in his, she realized this wasn't the ending of anything. It was the beginning of everything that truly mattered. Scandal doesn't scream at first. It starts with a whisper, passed between cocktail glasses and boardroom tables, cloaked in concern, masked as curiosity. And Gabriel Delancey's name was beginning to collect whispers like lint. It began in the Lower East Side, where he and Isabel had moved after Richard cut off their allowance. The penthouse was replaced by a 2-bedroom apartment with creaking floors and a cracked window pane. Gabriel claimed it was temporary. Isabel said it was romantic. Neither believed it. Cassandra heard it all secondhand, through Naomi, through the rare teacher who still messaged her, through quiet nods at cafes. She didn't seek the information. It found her anyway. Isabel had been fired again, this time from a small private school uptown. The word was unethical behavior. Rumors said she'd taken bribes from wealthy parents in exchange for inflated grades. Gabriel tried to contain the fallout. He met with old family friends, offered favors, promised he was still a Delancey, but no one wanted a scandal close to their name. And still, the whispers grew. Cassandra didn't celebrate. She didn't even smile. She only watched. It was like standing at the edge of a collapsed building, watching the dust finally settle. One morning, Richard Delancey summoned Lucas to the estate. Cassandra went with him, though she didn't expect to be part of the conversation. She waited in the garden while the men spoke behind oak-paneled doors. Lucas found her half an hour later, his expression unreadable. "They want back in," he said simply. She looked up. "Gabriel and Isabel?" "Just Gabriel," he replied. "He said he's done with her, wants to repair his name." Cassandra scoffed, but it wasn't cruel. It was hollow. "And your father?" she asked. Lucas shrugged. He told him, "You can return." "But she never will." She nodded once. "Of course." Later that week, Gabriel returned to the estate alone. Cassandra saw him through the window. his once proud stride now muted, his shoulders slightly slumped. He looked like a man who still wore his name like armor, but found it rusted. He didn't ask to see her. He didn't dare, and she didn't go down to meet him. Instead, she sat beside Lucas on the porch of their brownstone that evening. The city. Quiet hum around them. "He's trying to climb back into a house he set on fire," she said softly. Lucas didn't respond right away. Then, "Let him. The walls will remember." They sat in silence, Cassandra's hand resting over her stomach, not from pain but from instinct. The world behind her was crumbling, brick by brick, and in front of her something else was just beginning. It happened on a Thursday. The sky was an indifferent gray, and the air had that strange tension New York sometimes carried, like something was waiting to snap. Cassandra was packing. She and Lucas had finally found a home of their own, a warm brownstone in the West Village, with tall windows and quiet floors. She'd just finished sealing the last box of books when the knock came. Not the doorbell. A knock too hard, too fast, too familiar. She opened the door slowly. Isabel stood on the stoop, soaked from the drizzle, her coat open, her mascara smudged. "You did this?" she hissed. "No greeting, no build-up. You turned them all against me." Cassandra said nothing. Isabel stepped forward uninvited. "You think just because you married Lucas that you're better? You're just luckier. We're the same, you and I. Only difference is I never got caught pretending to be perfect." "I'm not pretending to be anything," Cassandra said calmly. "You came to my door, I didn't come to yours." "You don't get to walk away like you're clean," Isabel snapped, her voice fraying. "If I go down, I'll take you. With me." Then suddenly, too suddenly, she reached out and grabbed Cassandra's wrist. The movement wasn't violent, but it was desperate, reckless. Cassandra stumbled back. Her foot caught on the edge of the unpacked box behind her. Her balance tipped. The marble planter by the doorway met her temple with a dull, merciless crack. Darkness fell like velvet. She woke in a white room-sterile light, the faint beep of a heart monitor, the antiseptic sting of the real world. Lucas sat beside her, his hands gripping the edge of the hospital blanket. His knuckles were white, his eyes red-rimmed. "You're awake," he breathed. She tried to speak, but her mouth was dry. "I'm all right," she rasped. "No," he said, voice breaking. "You're not. You could have died." "I didn't." Lucas swallowed hard. Then, as gently as he could, he brushed a hand along her hairline. "There's something you need to know." She looked up. His voice shook. "The doctors, they ran a scan to check for internal trauma, and they found, Cassandra, you're pregnant." Silence, a different kind of stillness. Not fear, not shock, just wonder. "You're sure?" she whispered. Lucas nodded. "They confirmed it. Just a few weeks, but it's there. You're carrying our child." She closed her eyes, not to block the moment, but to feel it fully. A child, not from pain, not from arrangement, but from healing. Her voice was steady when she opened them again. "We're going to be all right." Lucas leaned forward and kissed her forehead, the faintest pressure of love and relief, and for the first time in years, Cassandra believed it. Recovery, Cassandra quickly learned, was not linear. Some days she felt almost normal, walking from bed to window without dizziness, drinking tea without shaking hands. Other days, it took everything she had just to sit upright without the memory of marble against her skull rising like a ghost. But the hardest part wasn't the pain. It was the stillness. She had spent so long surviving, fighting, defending. Now, all the noise had receded, and in its place was silence, and within that silence something new. Life. The word felt too fragile to say out loud. So she didn't, not at first. She carried it like a secret inside her chest, letting the idea bloom quietly in the corners of her mind. A heartbeat beneath her own. Lucas stayed close but never suffocated her. He moved gently, as if afraid she might break again. She often caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his eyes filled with something between awe and fear. "You don't have to hover," she told him one morning. smiling faintly. "I'm not hovering," he said. "I'm anchoring." It made her laugh, soft and short. Later, when she felt strong enough to walk down to the garden, he joined her. They sat on the stone bench beneath a bare-limbed tree, the winter sun pale and distant above them. "Do you remember," she said quietly, "when I told you I wasn't asking anything of you?" Lucas nodded. "Well, I'm still not," she continued. "But I want to offer you something, not a duty, a choice." His brow furrowed gently. "What choice?" "To be a father," she said. "Not because you feel obligated, but because you want to." Lucas didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for her hand and placed it gently over her stomach. "I already do," he said. A long breath escaped her chest, deeper than she realized she'd been holding. That night, she began writing again, not for publication, not for vindication. Just for herself. Her journal, leather-bound and half-empty, became a sacred space. She wrote to the baby, not in flourishes or declarations, but in simple truths. "I didn't know if I could ever trust again. But then you came quietly, without asking, for anything. And now I find myself dreaming of a tomorrow I once feared to name." She paused after the last line, her pen hovering, her other hand resting gently where her child had begun. For once, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. It arrived in a pale gray envelope, no return address, just her name, written in Gabriel's unmistakable handwriting, sharp, slanted, too practiced to be intimate. Cassandra found it among a small stack of mail on the hallway console, appointment reminders, a wedding invitation from someone she barely knew, and this. She didn't open it right away. She made tea, fed the cat, watered the plant by the window. Then, once the house was quiet again, once Lucas had left for a meeting and the walls had returned to stillness, she slit the envelope. The letter was 4 pages long. It began with a tone of apology. Not remorse, not accountability. Just the polished regret of a man who had lost something and finally realized it. He wrote about the past, their engagement, the pressure, the family expectations. He said he'd been confused, that Isabel had never meant to come between them, and that everything had spiraled out of control. There was no mention of the lies, no mention of her stolen career. Only this: "I miss the person I was with you. I miss the way you looked at me before. Everything fell apart. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'd like to talk. One last time." Cassandra read it once, then again, slower. She felt nothing, not anger, not pain, only the quiet clarity of distance. She folded the letter back along its original creases and walked to the fireplace. The flames were low, crackling lazily as if waiting for something to consume. She held the letter over the grate. The edges curled quickly, blackened into lace. The words disappeared in seconds, swallowed by flame, erased by silence. When Lucas returned that evening, he found her in the kitchen, stirring soup, her movements slow but calm. "Mail came," he said. "I know," she replied, not looking up. "Anything important?" She paused, then smiled faintly. "Nothing that matters anymore." He nodded, trusting her silence. Later that night, as they lay side by side beneath the soft hush of winter, Cassandra rested her hand gently on her belly and whispered to herself, "Some things deserve to be burned, not out of hate, but because they no longer deserve to be carried." It was published on a Wednesday, no fanfare, no announcement, just a quiet upload to the Voices section of the Manhattan Review, tucked between essays about housing inequality and literary criticism. Cassandra almost missed it. She'd submitted the piece weeks ago, not expecting anything, not hoping, just releasing it, like exhaling something that had lived too long in her chest. The Quiet Power of Choosing Yourself, by Cassandra Westwood Delancey. She stared at her name on the byline, simple and unadorned. It didn't look foreign. It looked right. She hesitated before reading it again. She already knew what it said. Every word had been pulled from scar tissue, written in the language of survival. It wasn't a tell-all. There were no names. No dates, no scandals spelled out. Just truth. She wrote about silencing herself for the comfort of others, about how leaving wasn't always loud, and survival didn't always look like victory, about how strength sometimes meant standing still and not explaining yourself. And somehow, that was enough. By the end of the day, the article had been shared, over 3,000 times. By the weekend, it was trending. Cassandra's inbox flooded with messages, not just from readers, but from women she didn't know. Strangers from Detroit, from Barcelona, from small towns with fewer syllables than options. They wrote of broken engagements, of toxic classrooms, of mothers who raised them to be quiet. They wrote, "Thank you for writing what I didn't know I needed to read. You said it for all of us. I didn't walk away, but now I might. Cassandra." Read them in silence, one hand on her belly, the other clutching the edge of her tea mug. She didn't cry. She just breathed. Lucas came home that evening with a small bouquet of wildflowers. Nothing showy, just soft colors and tangled stems. "I saw your article," he said, setting the flowers on the counter. "You read it?" 3 times, he said, placing a gentle hand over hers. It didn't sound like someone who wanted to be heard. It sounded like someone who already was. She smiled, and for the first time in years, it wasn't tempered by uncertainty. She wasn't chasing love or justice. She had found her voice, and the world had finally listened. The invitation arrived through Naomi. "He asked me to talk to you," she said one morning, stirring her coffee nervously. "Gabriel." Cassandra didn't look up from her tea. "What did he want?" "A meeting, just you and him, one time, no press, no Isabel, no drama." Naomi paused. "He said he needs closure." Cassandra exhaled through her nose. A quiet, slow breath, measured. Closure? As if she hadn't already buried that chapter 100 times. In silence, in therapy, in the spaces she chose not to fill with revenge. "What did you say?" Cassandra asked. Naomi hesitated. "I told him I'd ask, but I didn't promise anything." Cassandra nodded slowly. "Thank you." She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just went home. That night, as the city flickered beneath their brownstone windows, Lucas found her sitting alone in the nursery, her hand resting on her belly, her eyes distant. "He reached out again?" he asked. She nodded. "Through Naomi." Lucas said nothing at first. Then, "Do you want to see him?" "No." "Then don't." Cassandra turned to him. "What if I owe it to myself?" Lucas crossed the room, kneeling beside her chair. "You owe yourself peace. And if seeing him robs you of that, even for a moment, then it's not closure. It's sabotage dressed as sentiment." She reached out and touched his cheek. "That's exactly what I needed to hear." The next morning she wrote a letter. It was short, unemotional, clear. "Gabriel, I've already said goodbye. You just weren't listening. I hope you find whatever peace you're looking for, but it won't come from me." Cassandra, she sealed it, dropped it at Naomi's apartment, and walked away. No dramatic confrontation, no final tearful monologue. The ending Gabriel wanted had already happened. He just hadn't been ready for it, and maybe he never would be. But Cassandra wasn't waiting anymore. That evening, she stood on their rooftop patio, the spring air brushing her skin like a promise. Lucas came up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist. Below them, the city breathed. She rested her head against him. "No ghosts left," she whispered. Lucas smiled. "Then let's fill the space with something better." They stood in silence, the skyline spread before them. Not a reminder of what they'd escaped, but a canvas for everything still to come. It began with a headline, "Whistleblower Reveals." Years of academic fraud. Isabel Ward and Gabriel Delancey at center of new scandal. Cassandra saw it not on purpose, but in passing, her phone screen lighting up with Naomi's name, followed by a single message. "You were right." She didn't open the article. She didn't need to. The whispers followed quickly. Staff members from Isabel's former school speaking out anonymously, past bribes traced back to Gabriel's consulting firm, even voice recordings leaked to the press. It turned out Isabel hadn't just faked student records. She'd used Cassandra's plagiarized essay as a template for dozens of similar scams, and Gabriel had helped distribute them for a price. It was everything Cassandra had once feared, and none of it touched her now. Not this time. She sat on the living room floor, folding baby clothes as the news anchors dissected the scandal in the background. Lucas entered with a grocery bag, pausing when he saw the frozen image of Gabriel's face on the television. "You okay?" he asked. Cassandra nodded. "It doesn't feel like anything." Lucas smiled faintly. "That's how you know you've really let go." The Delancey estate issued an immediate statement. Gabriel was formally disinherited. Isabel, no longer protected by anyone's silence, was being investigated by the Department of Education. They fled the city within the week, rumors of a small coastal town, somewhere anonymous, where nobody cared about their past. Cassandra received 3 emails from journalists asking for comment. She responded to none of them. She was busy choosing the color for her daughter's crib. She was busy editing her second column for the newspaper. She was busy living. And so the storm passed, a storm that once upon a time would have broken her into pieces. Now, it barely left a breeze in her hair. A week later, while walking through Central Park with Lucas, Cassandra stopped near a bench and sat down, resting her hand on her belly as their unborn daughter kicked gently beneath her ribs. Lucas sat beside her, offering her a sip of water. "It's strange," she murmured, watching a pair of children chase bubbles down the path. "I used to think healing would feel like victory. And now," she smiled, "it feels like silence, like peace, like I don't have to prove anything anymore." Lucas took her hand. "You don't." The wind rustled through the budding trees, and in that moment Cassandra realized that sometimes the most profound revenge wasn't justice. It was joy, undramatic, quiet, steady, and entirely her own. The first time Cassandra held her daughter, time folded in on itself. Everything else, the nurses moving around her, the beep of monitors, the distant hum of voices, disappeared. There was only this tiny, wrinkled being in her arms, swaddled in soft fabric and still warm from the womb, her breath a whisper against Cassandra's chest. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks, not from pain, not from fear, from awe. Lucas stood beside her, his hand cupping the baby's impossibly small head. His eyes shimmered, but he said nothing. Words would have only cheapened the moment. They had waited to name her. Cassandra hadn't wanted the name to come from a list or a family. Tradition. She wanted it to rise from the life they had built, earned, not assigned. Now, holding her, Cassandra knew. "Her name is Ilara," she said, voice soft but steady. Lucas blinked. "Ilara." "A moon," Cassandra said. Far away, quiet, unnoticed by most, but still orbiting something greater, still glowing. "She doesn't need to be the brightest star, she just needs to be hers." Lucas smiled, his thumb brushing the baby's cheek. "Ilara Grace Delancey." Cassandra nodded. "Grace, not because we were lucky, but because we chose to carry ourselves with it." The nurse came in then, clipboard in hand. "Ready to sign the certificate?" Cassandra took the pen and wrote each letter carefully, deliberately. The name felt like a vow, a whisper of who her daughter might become. Not someone defined by legacy, not trapped by family debts or gilded cages, but free. When they returned home 2 days later, the brownstone had been transformed. Soft lights glowed in the nursery. A mobile hung over the crib, tiny constellations dancing in the air. A note from Naomi sat on the dresser. "To Ilara, whose story already matters." In the weeks that followed, Cassandra spent hours at the window, cradling Ilara, humming lullabies, sometimes writing by hand when her daughter slept. Her next essay came slowly, deliberately. What we give our daughters. It was about more than motherhood. It was about breaking cycles, about choosing love over legacy, about naming a child not for where she comes from, but for where she's allowed to go. When it published, Her inbox filled again. But this time, the messages weren't about scandal. They were about hope. Cassandra printed the first letter she received, one from a woman in Ohio who had left an emotionally abusive marriage after reading her story. She framed it and placed in the nursery beside the crib. Someday she would show Alara, not to say, "Look what I did," but to say, "Look what you inspired." It was early spring in New York, and sunlight spilled lazily across the hardwood floor of the West Village. Brownstone. Outside, the world was shaking off its frost. But inside, Cassandra sat quietly at her writing desk, her hands poised over a blank page. Alara was napping upstairs, the soft thump of the rocking chair above her like a gentle metronome. Lucas was out, picking up groceries and coffee beans from the market 3 blocks away. And Cassandra, for the first time in weeks, had a rare sliver of silence. In front of her lay a single sheet of creamy, thick paper, the kind that felt like it should hold something important. She hadn't intended to write a letter, not anymore. But after the birth, after the chaos and triumph, after the press interviews and the growing reputation of her essays, there was one thread she had never fully tied off. Gabriel, not because she still loved him, not because she wanted to speak to him again, but because in some quiet corner of her heart, there remained a ghost of the girl she used to be, the girl who had once believed love meant endurance. She took a breath and began to write, the words, flowing not like vengeance but like release. Dear Gabriel, I will never send you this letter. That is the first truth you should know. Because this isn't for you, it's for me. I've tried many times to understand how a person can say they love someone and still abandon them. How they can kiss you goodnight and lie to your face in the same breath. For a while, I thought I must have been too naive, too trusting, that I'd misread you. Misread everything, but I didn't. I saw you clearly. I just believed in the better version of you, the one you never chose to become. For a long time, I hated myself for that. Now I don't. Because believing in someone, even when they don't deserve it, isn't a weakness, it's a kind of strength. But knowing when to stop, that's power. You taught me that. You taught me what silence can hide, what charm can destroy, what cowardice looks like in a man wearing a suit too big for his character. And I thank you for it in a way, not because I'm grateful for the pain, but because you made it impossible for me to pretend anymore. If you hadn't betrayed me so thoroughly, I might still be there, in that cage of tradition, waiting for you, dimming myself so you could shine. But I'm not there anymore. I have a daughter now. Her name is Alara. She will never be told that love must hurt to be real, that being chosen is the same as being valued, that a man's attention is the measure of her worth. She will know how to walk away because I did. Lucas is everything you aren't. Not because he's perfect, but because he's honest. Because he listens. Because he shows up. He doesn't need to be the hero, he just loves me. And that, I've learned, is more than enough. I used to dream of revenge, of seeing you crumble, of showing the world who you really are. But I don't need that anymore. Your ruin isn't mine to orchestrate, it's yours to live through, and my joy, that's mine to live, fully. You don't need to understand. And I don't need your apology. We are done, not with bitterness, but with finality. Goodbye, Gabriel. Cassandra, she put down the pen and stared at the letter. There was no trembling in her fingers, no heat behind. Her eyes, only calm. She didn't cry. She folded the paper neatly and slid it into an unmarked envelope, then tucked it into the back of her journal, buried, but not forgotten. She wouldn't send it. But now it existed, and that was enough. Upstairs, Alara let out a soft cry. Cassandra rose slowly, pressing a hand to her abdomen where life had once stirred, and now left behind something even more powerful. Purpose, as she entered the nursery. Alara blinked up at her, wide-eyed and curious. Cassandra smiled. Time to wake up, Starlight. She lifted her daughter into her arms and held her close. Alara smelled of warmth and linen and innocence. Cassandra sat in the rocker, holding her against her chest, and whispered a story, not from a book, but from memory. Once upon a time, there was a girl who forgot herself, who gave everything to someone who gave nothing in return. But then she remembered. She remembered her voice, her worth, her fire, and she walked away. Ilara's fingers curled against her. Blouse content and safe. And that girl, Cassandra said, kissing her daughter's forehead. She became a woman, a mother, a writer, and she never forgot herself again. Outside, spring sunlight streamed through the nursery window, casting golden shapes on the walls. Cassandra rocked gently, humming. The past was over, the future was hers, and Ilara's story, the one that truly mattered, had just begun. Reflection: The Quiet Revolution of Cassandra Westwood. Cassandra Westwood began her story like many of us do, with expectations placed upon her before she ever had the chance to ask herself what she truly wanted. Born into privilege, groomed for perfection, and engaged to Gabriel Delancey since her teenage years, Cassandra was not just a woman. She was a symbol of legacy, of obedience, of a family alliance crafted behind closed doors. But the tragedy of her first life wasn't just that Gabriel betrayed her, or that her health failed in the end. The real tragedy was that Cassandra never got the chance to live for herself. She was chosen, shaped, and sacrificed on the altar of appearances. When she died and came back, not metaphorically, but literally, she was offered the kind of second chance most of us only dream about. But what makes her story resonate isn't the fantasy of reincarnation. It's what she chose to do with it. In her second life, Cassandra didn't seek revenge through power plays or dramatic confrontations. She didn't expose her enemies to the world or demand apologies. Instead, she made one quiet, radical decision. She chose herself. She ended the engagement. She stepped away from Gabriel, not out of hatred, but clarity. She married Lucas, the brother the world overlooked, not because he was a weapon against Gabriel, but because she saw something rare in him: kindness without performance, love without condition. But even that wasn't the end of her battle. Isabel returned, lies returned. She lost her job, her reputation, her footing, and still, Cassandra didn't break. She wrote, she healed, she waited. And slowly, the world caught up with her truth. Her essays, filled with quiet wisdom and elegant rage, reached women across the globe. Not because they were scandalous, but because they were real. Her silence became her protest. Her honesty became her revolution. Then came the most unexpected chapter of all: motherhood. Ilara wasn't just a child. She was a promise that Cassandra would not pass on silence to the next generation, that her daughter would never learn to shrink herself for anyone, that healing, real healing, was not an act of vengeance, but of creation. By the final chapter, Gabriel and Isabel had collapsed under the weight of their choices. The scandals they built as distractions turned inward and destroyed them. And Cassandra? She didn't even need to look back, because she had already walked forward. The life lesson: Cassandra's story teaches us one powerful truth. You don't need to win the war. You just need to stop participating in it. Walking away is often harder than staying, especially when the world tells you that closure requires confrontation, or that healing must come with revenge. But Cassandra chose peace over performance, and that's what made her strong. She didn't shout. She didn't retaliate. She didn't need to prove her worth to anyone, because the moment she stopped seeking their validation, she finally saw her own. How you can apply this in real life: let go of battles that only exhaust you. Not. Every wound deserves an answer. Some just need space to heal. Write your truth. Whether in a journal, a letter never sent, or a quiet text to yourself, truth becomes power when it's acknowledged. Choose relationships that nourish, not perform. Like Lucas, the right people see your pain without demanding a performance. From you, be willing to start over, even in silence. Sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's slow, quiet, and deeply transformative. Quiz time. Let's see how closely you followed Cassandra's journey. Question: why did Cassandra choose to marry Lucas instead of Gabriel? A. To get revenge on Gabriel. B. Because she wanted respect and a future built on honesty. Comment your answer below. D or B, I'll be checking to see who got it right. Let's see how many of you are true Cassandra fans.